we're going to be discussing what's called Britain's secret wars, which includes Bangladesh. So last week I sent round to people the chapter on Bangladesh, which I hope people may have read. I scanned it in, so it came page by page. And that chapter on Bangladesh and the death squad is one chapter amongst several in this book called Britain's Secret Wars, which describes Britain's involvement in covert operations across a number of countries, which I'll come on to in a bit. But just to contextualise this, we can distinguish between Britain's secret wars. They're secret in two senses. They are little known to the public. They are submerged, and you have to struggle to find the information about them. So they are kept secret for as long as possible. So they're secret in that sense. And they're also secret in another sense, which is to say that Parliament has no prior knowledge of these wars. In other words, they're conducted by the deep establishment outside Parliament scrutiny. So these secret wars have neither been approved by Parliament or scrutinised by Parliament, and the public know less about them as well. So they're secret in different dimensions. They're called secret wars compared to the open wars. So I'll say a bit about Britain's open wars to contextualise the secret wars. In the last 100 years, for example, there's not been a single year, in which Britain has not been involved in wars overseas. Not a single year has passed in the last 100 where there's not been a British military presence somewhere in the world fighting a war. And this makes Britain the most aggressive country in the history of the world, far exceeding Russian or Soviet or indeed United States involvement, although they run a close second and third. Britain is the most aggressive state the world's ever known. And we all know about the public wars. They go back to the commencement of the empire and fights with European rival nations. They go back into Middle Ages. We're not talking about those wars today. Those wars carry on. Afghanistan, Iraq, and so on. Libya, Kosovo, and so on. These are public wars known to the whole world, to those who wish to know. But we're talking about secret wars, and they're a different dimension because they are in many ways far more important than the open wars. And let me just give you a flavour of 3 examples of secret wars which are not mentioned in this book here, which I referred you to, Britain's Secret Wars. This refers to wars post 9/11, post in 2000 onwards. But just in case you don't know, there are many other secret wars conducted by Britain, in the sense that they're not known to the public and Parliament did not approve of them. I'll just mention 3 of them, because one involved my father. My father was a soldier in World War II in Egypt and Italy. And at the end of the war, 1945-46, he was sent to Greece to fight the Greek partisans, the Greeks who fought the Nazis. He was sent to fight, and they were communists. He was sent to fight the communist Greeks who were seeking to take over Greece and declare a communist state, or at least a socialist state. So he was sent colleagues to fight Greek partisans and anti-fascists. And they, of course, as you know, they restored the Greek monarchy as a consequence. And my father was threatened with court-martial because he refused to fight the Greeks. One day they were his allies, next day they were his enemies. And many servicemen, he was a private, many servicemen of lower ranks were very concerned that the British Army is being used for this purpose. And that's one example. Another example, perhaps even more significant, was at the end of the war in Southeast Asia, the National Front of Vietnam, led by Ho Chi Minh and led by the Communist Party of Vietnam, this National Front, anti-Japanese front, expelled the Japanese forces from Vietnam and moved on to occupy Saigon. The British Army, in fact, Churchill, our friend Churchill, sent a division of Indian soldiers, Indian Army, Division of Indian Army, along with Royal Air Force and Royal Navy, to Saigon, where they brutally forced back the Ho Chi Minh and the Communist Party, and they expelled into the north. They acted with great brutality, bombing the population randomly in their attempt to prevent a communist takeover. But most importantly, this was unbeknown to the public, not known to Parliament, and ironically, this echoes my father's experience, they commandeered the surrendered Japanese army, which they'd been fighting for 5 years. The surrendered army was commandeered by the British to fight against Ho Chi Minh. 1 minute, the Japanese army were the enemy of Britain. The next day, the Allies fighting against Ho Chi Minh and the communist takeover. And this was not known at all, it's little known, information seeped out, but it's very carefully guarded. And we know the consequence is that following that expulsion of Ho Chi Minh from Saigon by the British and the Japanese and Vichy France soldiers, they endured a long war called the Vietnamese War involving the Americans. But had Britain not intervened in 1945, history would have been very, very different. The other example of a secret war was the war in Oman, the Sultan of Oman. In the 50s and 60s, Britain secretly supported, trained, gave military advice and sent special soldiers to support the Sultan of Oman in a brutal war against a population who was seeking a socialist, communist takeover of the country. It was a war lasted about 12 years, and it's a war taken over by Harold Wilson in 1966. He kept it covert. The Labour Party colluded with this whole episode, kept it a secret. And in 1976, the Sultan of Oman, or rather his son, who had replaced him, succeeded in suppressing the insurgents, and Oman remained, in fact, a neo-colony of Great Britain. And just bringing up to date in terms of secret wars and the fact that Parliament had not approved in the recent war against Syria, although Parliament itself had voted against involvement in Syria, nonetheless, in 2013, Cameron arranged for secret involvement in the Syrian war, sending special advisors, bombing raids. The RAF was used, often embedded with United States or Canadian Air Force. And it was only in 2015 did Parliament give retrospective approval of a secret war. So those are examples of two sorts of warfare Britain's been involved in. The warfare involving overt, clear-cut acts of aggression in so-called defence of national interest, meaning, of course, a particular class of people, and the covert wars, which are so dangerous, so controversial, they are kept secret, but they serve the same end, which is the promotion of Britain's establishment and its class interest in terms of what's called free trade. Free trade, of course, is a euphemism for neo-colonial exploitation of people and resources in the ex-colonies. All these wars serve the same purpose, which is a promotion of so-called free trade or the neoliberal agenda. And in Britain's Secret Wars, this book here, I don't know if you had a chance to read the introduction, but it talks about promotion of free trade, the neoliberal agenda, and how Britain has gone about, in collusion with the United States and with France, for example, has gone about in very many covert ways in places like Syria, Libya, Iraq, Iran, Yemen, the Ukraine, Sri Lanka, Colombia, Somalia, Papua, and of course Bangladesh. These are examples in the 21st century where Britain has conducted clandestine illegal operations against local populations in pursuit of self-interest, the self-interest of the neoliberals and the capitalist classes they represent. And what I sent through at your request last week was an account of what's happening in Bangladesh. And so maybe here's a chance for me to stop speaking in general and to then invite a discussion about that Bangladesh chapter and related issues around secret wars. So I'll stop there and maybe give Abu a chance to make some comments about Bangladesh, maybe.
Thank you, Paul. From what I know, from what I've read about Bangladesh, and I've got relatives there, obviously, and the government is like...
Arabia are actively coordinating, conducting drone warfare against the usurpers in Yemen, fighting on behalf of the Saudi Arabian monarchy. So this is all going on all the time. Very dangerous policy in Ukraine because the Russians don't, normally speaking, take these things lightly and respond very aggressively. So maybe they've bitten off more than they can chew in the Ukraine. It's a very dangerous situation. But the other famous case, of course, was in Kosovo and in the Balkans. That whole war was fomented and orchestrated by NATO and in particular by Tony Blair and the Americans, all done covertly, all masquerading as humanitarian involvement, but it's not humanitarian at all. On the contrary, that's a euphemism for a great deal of violence and aggression. Generally speaking, of course, the local populations get caught up in this warfare and suffer badly. But that relates, of course, to our previous discussions about racism and white supremacy. It doesn't matter what you do to local populations in that part of the world because they are dispensable. And they're called collateral damage because allies don't count for very much. So all these things are connected, of course. All our discussions are connected in one way or the other.
Western lives are valued.
And the reason being that the present Bangladeshi government talks about defending secularism and fighting enemies on two fronts. The first front is obviously the muckraker in the trade unions, the socialists, and so on and so forth, the human rights activists, and so on. Other troublemakers are the so-called Islamists. So you have, there are two opposition parties in Bangladesh, two major opposition parties in Bangladesh, Bangladeshi National Party, and the other one is Jamaat-e-Islami. So Jamaat-e-Islami, the name might sound as some sort of a Islamist organization, but it's not exactly a Islamist. Bangladesh, we should remember, has about 91% of the Muslim population, and a lot of people have, it grew up as more sort of a, I won't say working class, but sort of a, had massive support in the peasant population, or landless farm workers, in those particular sort of demographics. So they both represent,
popular amongst the madrasa students.
Yes, so they both the Bangladeshi National Party as well as the Jamaat-e-Islami, they both represent the genuine aspirations and discontent of the population. And the population we are not talking about here, the population which is in any case hell-bent on creating some sort of a khilafat or anything like that, but genuine sort of a oppression, exploitation which is happening. And the trope that is being used here is that these people are basically connected with some sort of a international network of Islamists and so on and so forth. And these disappearances are very, very, I mean, Amnesty talks about it very often, that Bangladeshi workers or the Muslim activists who have been working with some madrasa students or something like that, they have been disappearing and so on and so forth. And similarly, socialist and trade union leaders are disappearing. And the training for this has been, as Paul has highlighted, has been provided by Britain and exemplified in that the paramilitary sort of force, the action
Rapid
force.
Action Battalion.
Yeah. Rapid Action Battalion. So that's one aspect. The other aspect is the involvement of India. Not only Britain, but involvement of India. And here the role of India has been, from the beginning of the partition of India, then partition of Pakistan, has been very crucial. So when Pakistan was divided and Bangladesh was formed, Indira Gandhi gave a very curious statement. It's quite telling. Indira Gandhi said publicly, it's recorded, that we took revenge for 1,000 years of slavery. And that's very, very interesting, because Indira Gandhi always flaunted her secular sort of credentials, that we are not biased in any particular way, or we are not biased towards Hindus or against Muslims and so on and so forth. But after Bangladesh, creation of Bangladesh, partition of Pakistan, this statement was very curious, and it tells a lot. And since then, you can see that Bangladeshi governments have been more or less very significantly heavily influenced by New Delhi. Even the present government is quite heavily influenced, and the Bangladeshi, not only the Bangladeshi police, like these kind of paramilitary police, are being also trained by the Indian forces, but the Bangladeshi military is getting arms. India is one of the chief arms supplier to the Bangladeshis. China is replacing that gradually, but Bangladesh is still, India still is one of the significant supplier of the arms and so on and so forth. So Bangladesh is playing a really important role, that is in exemplifying how the neoliberal policies, or how neocolonialism is operating on a local level as well as the global level. So you have Britain and globally, and you have international corporations which are creating the global value chains and creating subcontractors and then subcontractors and whatever layers of subcontractors who are basically exploiting, not only exploiting, super exploiting the workers, Bangladeshi workers, giving them lower than subsistence level of whatever salaries and so on. On the one hand, this is happening. The other hand, the entire machinery of oppression, the brutal, naked oppression, is being fine-tuned, and it's being oiled, is being refined, and this all is happening using the lingo of the modern sort of lingo of countering terrorism, or
absolutely,
isn't it? And the other thing,
what happens in Britain, of course,
exactly.
The
So that's quite important. That's quite interesting. Another thing, but just one related point. Do people know who Jaishankar is? Jaishankar is basically Minister of External Affairs at the present, Indian Minister of External Affairs. He recently gave a statement that our relationship, India's relationship with Bangladesh, exemplifies the relationship, neighborly relationship that we should have. And it's quite interesting that he gave that statement. While he gave that statement, around the similar time, or I think a year before, the Home Minister of BJP government, Amit Shah, gave the statement that the Bangladeshi migrants are basically termites, and so you have the Minister of External Affairs saying that the relationship that we have with the Bangladesh, that is Bangladeshi ruling class, that is the Bangladeshi government, are the exempt. Are the exact relationships that they want. That is, they want to control their policies and so on. But when it comes to the population,
to become an experiment for neoliberalism, and so the Bangladeshi leaders and the ruling class overtly say, as indicated in that chapter, is that they welcome their exploitation of their workers. They're there to be exploited. They don't say that, but that's what they mean. So this enterprise zones, what's called stability needed to make profits. Bangladesh has been given to the neoliberal global chain to maximise profits. It's been gifted with their collusion. And of course, any attempt to undermine that with a population which is discontented, the victims of that process are brutally put down with impunity. You couldn't easily say in Britain, although it has happened, you couldn't make trade union leaders disappear overnight and find their bodies next day in a ditch, tortured. But you can do that in Bangladesh because lives are so much more devalued. So Bangladesh has become a melting pot for neoliberalism unfettered, and the brutal exploitation of the Bangladeshi population. And it's ironic that in terms of GDP, in terms of wealth generated, Bangladesh is the 39th most rich country in the world. It's ranked 39 in the index of wealth. But it's actually a very large country, 160 million people. It's about I think it's the third or fourth biggest country in the world in terms of population. So it's a wonderful place to get involved in neoliberalism. Vast wealth is generated, but of course, not equally so. So there's immense poverty in Bangladesh, but it's an immensely rich country because the wealth goes, of course, to a small number of people. So Bangladesh is a very good example. Capital who resist these major changes in people's lives. It's a very good example of all of that which we've been discussing in the past several weeks, really.
The crony capitalism.
Not only the socialist, but a kind of a Muslim socialist platform, which can be used to mobilize unify the various oppressed groups, peasants, working class people, the emerging sort of working class in the bigger cities, and so on and so forth, was a major, major threat for the ruling class. And the present government of Hasina recognized that quite clearly, and that's why they are targeting anyone who comes up with these particular ideas, or this threatens the neoliberal policies that they are following in any way, using the tropes like they are troublemakers, as Islamists, and so on and so forth.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Because in the first few years of Bangladesh as an independent country, there was an attempt to undertake land reform, which is always the case in such circumstances. It's not a proletariat, it's about landless peasants, and trying to overcome the Zamindar class, which is very strong in that part of the world. And of course, we're aware, of course, in India of the Adivasi groups of people, the tribal peoples, but so Adivasi. But in Bangladesh, there's also a large number of Adivasi who live on the land, and it's their land which is being taken away in terms of these free zones and so on and so forth, as in India. So in one sense, you get the same tensions in Bangladesh as you get in India writ large, but with a Bangladeshi flavour. It was an attempt at the key to all post-colonial justice is land reform. Who owns the land? It's not about factories and the proletariat, which are very, very small. It's about land ownership, and this threatened the very structure of the Bangladesh society. And for that reason, those early reformers were sidelined, and in many cases they were killed. The Zamindar class and the politicians who represent the ruling class all rose up to suppress this socialist cauldron. And that's been ever since. That's been going on ever since 1972, 75. And now we have a complete opposite, a perfect neoliberal playground.
Just a general question to everyone. Do people know about some significant examples of land reforms that were implemented during the post-colonial wave, or the independence sort of, during the independence struggles, after or post-independence struggles of various countries of the global south?
Well, there are attempts in South Africa, of course. Zimbabwe in South Africa, attempts to reform land, but of course it all went belly up.
Vietnam?
No, I'm not familiar, so that's why I'm asking the question.
In Punjab, there's the Green Revolution that created big landlords and stuff, but I don't know what the actual land reforms.
What's the status of big landlords in India at the moment? Are there many big landlords? Or?
Sorry?
Well, in Orissa, part of it where I was, there has been, there was a land reform law passed, I think, in about 1974 or something, and it was eventually implemented about 10 or 15 years later. And what had happened, I don't know about the whole area, but the part that I know about, to a great extent, they're not zamindars, but they're like village headmen who owned very large, originally they owned the whole village, and they had very large land holdings. They tended to be upper caste, they didn't involve in agricultural work themselves. Some of them were absentee landlords, owning the bulk part of a whole village. That class either sold off their land quickly before the land reform came in, or to some extent had the land taken away from them. And that class is now not now particularly significant in the area I know about, It's not particularly significant in the countryside as landlords, as in terms of the agricultural economy. They've moved largely into cities, into towns, and become part of the industrial economy or part of the administrative system. What you have instead now, the structure in the village is one where you don't have a landlord class as such, but it's the rich peasants who are now the dominant force. So that you have the dominant group in the village, and quite often the dominant caste, are rich peasants, the people who have sufficient land for themselves and have to employ labor in order to cultivate it, who frequently own tractors and combine harvesters and so on, which they then hire out to the poorer peasants. And underneath that, you have middle peasants who probably have enough land to survive. And then you have very poor peasants who have a little bit of land, but they have to make up the balance by labor. And at the bottom rung, you have the landless laborers. So you have this same kind of structure that Mao identified in China. What the land reform has really done has to replace the pure landlord by the rich peasant. The landlords have taken their capital and moved into other sectors. Now, I don't know if that's true anywhere else in India, but I suspect it may well be, because land reform was an important policy for the Indira Gandhi government, particularly, and other and its successors, to show that they were doing something about the problems of the peasants. So it was important for them to pass some kind of land reform law. But as far as resolving the problem in the countryside of poverty and exploitation and so on, it has done nothing at all. Quite clear.
Coming in to work the land, or does it rely on?
No, Orissa is basically an exporting the export labour to other parts.
So the big landlords that have got
promises made to every slave by Lincoln to give each slave and his family 40 acres and a mule. You may have heard of this phrase, 40 acres and a mule. The plan was to carve up and parcel out all the old plantations in the American South, and also in the emerging new states going westwards. So every liberated slave was promised a piece of land, 40 acres, and a mule to become self-sufficient. And that was a promise made by Lincoln. It lasted about a year before Congress and the whole political class reneged upon that promise. And eventually the whole social policy fell into abeyance. And all those plantation lands, which had been taken by the state after the war from the plantation owners, was given back to those owners. So now this illustrates, of course, that, and this is the history of post-colonial land reform, the general story has been, with exceptions of communist countries, where there's been a non-communist takeover, what you find is that land reform, the promises made by the emerging bourgeoisie, who've taken over from the old colonial masters, the new emerging bourgeoisie have been coming to power on the promise of land reform, but very soon after that promise is reneged upon, and land returns to the landlords, the landowners, in some shape or form. So land reform has always been a rally cry for liberation, for social justice, it's been extraordinarily difficult in most countries to actually put that into practice. You describe Orissa, it sounds very much nothing's changed really, just some legal status, but the actual ownership, access to land has not really changed. And it's only been in those countries which were overtly communist at the point of being decolonized or through a revolution, was land.
I mean, who got, if the Hindu landlords were chucked out, who took the land over? Or did the peasants get it?
Right. No, you're right, Jim.
James, you are talking about 1947, right?
Yes, yes.
47. Yeah. That's quite right. That's quite right. Yeah.
In fact, that reminds me, Jim, is that I just remember now. You just prompted my memory. Is that in 46, 47 in what became Bangladesh, many labourers attacked Hindu landlords in terms of violence. You know, there's outbursts of violence towards landlords in the way you just described. You know, yeah.